We are in Psalm 3. David is fleeing from Absalom. Verses 1 and 2, he is crying out to God in his distress, anxiety. He's overwhelmed by his problems. Lots of people are against him, and they're all saying that God is against him as well. But David knows better. Verse 4, he turns to God and cries out to God with his voice. Verse 3, he says, "You, Lord, are my shield. I run behind you. You're my glory. I celebrate and worship you. You're the lifter of my head. You're the one that gives me a clear perspective and a forward perspective. And you're the one that cheers me up and puts joy back into me." So after he cries out to God and talks to God, verse 5 is where we pick up today. Actually, we talked about verse 5 yesterday. "I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me." God put him to sleep. God gave him rest. God gave his heart and his mind the ability to settle down and release. That's the word. He gave him release. And God sustained him. He woke up refreshed, sustained. He saw that God saw him through another night, one night at a time. I want you to catch now the dramatic shift in David in verse 6. "I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about." Now just let this sink in for a minute, okay? David begins weeping, crying, distressed, troubled. "God, lots of people are against me. Many there be that say of my soul, there's no help for him in God." Okay. "I'm outnumbered, God, and I'm afraid. I'm scared to death. I'm running for my life." But by verse 6, "I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about." I'm not afraid of 10,000 people. 10,000s, maybe more than one set of 10,000. So David's complete. Now, catch this. By all accounts, the story has not changed yet. The circumstances have not changed yet. Before David's circumstances have changed, his perspective has changed. His attitude has changed. His view of the circumstances has changed. This challenges me because my biggest challenges in life are not what's going on around me, but what's going on within me. My biggest battle is, how do I calm what's going on inside of me? How do I focus what's going on inside of me? How do I have God's perspective? How do I defeat the anxiety, the fear, the whatever that the depression, the discouragement, the season that I'm up against in the moment? And I know this. I'm no different than you, and you're no different than me. We can in one moment look at life and everything looks bad. But something can change within us, not externally, but within us, and everything suddenly looks better. Suddenly everything looks hopeful. Everything looks joyful. I don't entirely understand every component of that, but I know this, that depression or seasonal discouragement, I know that circumstances sometimes can get into our head. Sometimes I feel like it's purely spiritual, like there's purely a demonic lie being streamed into my head that not even God will help me, that nothing good is going on. It's always a lie, okay? But it's always dark and it's always powerful. I'm not saying this is a pervasive experience. It's a periodic experience, and it has been most of my Christian life, okay, where it might be self-condemnation. I'm not a very good Christian. God must be disappointed with me. It might be condemnation of my ministry work, that God's not doing something. Now, I know he is, okay? But seasonally and from time to time, Satan wants to jump into our heads and tell us things are going badly and there's no hope. But look at David. The circumstances have not changed, but he says, "I will not be afraid." His attitude has changed. I'm not afraid. God's my hope. God's my shield. But let me tell you, one of the major things, a lot has changed in David in these 5 verses. But one of the most significant changes is that David rested. I know this. I think it was Vince Lombardi. I used to have this series of quotes hanging on my office wall in California. And they were from a company called Successories. I just like these inspiring quotes. It was a picture of a football on a field, and it was a Vince Lombardi quote, and I loved it. And it was something like this: I believe that any man's finest hour is that moment when he has exhausted himself in a great cause and he lies victorious, exhausted and victorious on the field of battle. So it was this call to warfare, that just inspired me. Yes, I want to go out there and give it all I've got. I want to expend and exhaust myself for God, for his people. I want to win God's victories. I want to savor God's triumphs. And I want to lie exhausted on the field of battle. This was, my 20-something self. I loved that quote. Man, I'm going to go, burn myself up for God. And then I can remember seasons of life lying exhausted on the field of battle. And there is a component to that is joyful, celebratory, victorious. But the celebration tends to be short-lived because of the exhaustion, okay? And I remember at times being so exhausted and going, where'd that joy go? Where'd that celebration? And then that quote on my office wall would mock me, And then I came across one day another Vince Lombardi quote, and it was in the book First Things First by Stephen Covey. If you've never read that book, great book, especially if you're in a zone of life where you are facing competing priorities and demands, and if you're in that rising youth zone, 20s and 30s, where you're building into a life and dreams, and you've got a lot out in front of you. And don't get me wrong, I've got a lot out in front of me. I just see it differently than I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. But First Things First is a great book about defining what's valuable, what's important, and addressing those things, and not letting lesser priorities crowd out the truly valuable priorities of your life. Other than the Bible, it's the best book I've ever read, the most impactful book I've ever read. I'll say it that way. But in that book, Stephen Covey shared another Vince Lombardi quote. And it's a short one. And it says, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." And when I came across that quote, I felt betrayed by Vince Lombardi and by Successories both. In other words, I felt like I had posted on my wall an incomplete view. Philosophically, this "lie exhausted on the field of battle" quote was insufficient, because the very same man at some point in his life circled back around and said, hey, yeah, be exhausted, but don't stay that way, because fatigue, exhaustion, makes cowards of us all. There's something that happens in you and me when we're tired. We lose not only our strength, we lose our confidence, we lose our motivation, we lose our optimism. Everything stinks. Everything is hard. We don't want to do anything. And you know what we need at those times? We haven't lost our salvation. We don't necessarily need spiritual revival in those moments. Maybe sometimes we do if it's spiritual. But we tend to spiritualize things that are not spiritual. Okay? And in lots of times in my life, that sense of hopelessness, that sense of negativity, that sense of despair hasn't even been very deep. It's been as deep as my mattress. It's been as deep as my pillow. Shout out to My Pillow. I love My Pillow. Anyway, it's been as deep as, a down comforter. In other words, a lot of times that darkness is not psychological, it's not spiritual, it's physical. And what we need is a good night's sleep. I cannot tell you the number of times in my life that a good night's sleep or a good break, a week or two, or even longer at times if necessary, I've thought often about taking a longer sabbatical because I feel like that would be good for the duration, for the long haul of ministry. And lots of friends have encouraged me to take a sabbatical. I've never done it. Maybe someday, maybe soon, who knows? I don't know. But someday that'll happen. I just know this: rest at the right time, in the right measure, is God's gift. He created us to need 7 or 8 hours of sleep out of every 24 hours. He created us to need a single day of inactivity out of every 7, called Sabbath. He created seasons in the life of Israel. In Jesus' earthly life, Jesus would have had 9 weeks a year, basically off. A week traveling to Jerusalem, a week in Jerusalem celebrating the feast and worshiping and sacrificing, and then a week traveling home. And he would have done that every year of his life. Growing up in Nazareth, a week traveling down south and into the hills up into Jerusalem, a week in Jerusalem, and a week home. Walking 3 miles an hour for a week, and then feasting and celebrating and worshiping for a week, and then walking home 3 miles an hour for a week. And his family would have had to do that. His dad, Joseph, his stepdad, his mom, they would have had to shut down their businesses, close down their shops. They would have had to save enough food for the travel and save enough money for the provisions and to be able to take this time off. 9 weeks every year, on top of 1 day of rest out of every 7. See, this is our God. Our God created us for rhythms of rest. David, no doubt, by the time he got to verse 5, was expended, distressed, and when you get expended, depletion makes your exhaustion even worse, and your fears grow, your imaginations grow, your negativity grows. David needed a lot. He needed protection. He needed God's intervention. He needed a lot of things, but you know what he needed? First, before anything else, he needed to sleep. He needed to rest because he needed a fresh mind with truthful perspective. He needed to get rid of all the negative, biased view that his exhaustion was creating. And so God gave him sleep, and sleep changed everything. My friend, don't make a bad decision if you're exhausted. Don't make a decision if you're tired. Rest, come at it with a fresh mind, pace yourself, let God restore you, and let him bring about the new perspective that just a good night's sleep will bring. And let me just tell you this, be patient with someone around you or near you that's also tired. My most difficult relational interactions are either when I'm tired or the person I'm trying to relate to is tired. And once we understand that, it's like, hey, you know what? Go crash. We'll deal with this later. You need to rest. I need to rest. I'm sorry. If I come into a staff meeting tired, I'm not happy in that staff meeting. We're better just to walk away and sleep, and then come back at those relationships with a rested soul and a rested mind and heart. Sleep is amazingly transformational. So, my friend, I don't know what you did this holiday season. I don't know if you are refreshed, restored, or expended and depleted. But I can tell you this. If you're looking at negative things, feeling deeply negative about them, first stop ought to be, am I exhausted? Am I fatigued physically? And if so, rest. And then you'll have greater clarity on the other factors, spiritual, emotional, psychological, seasonal, other things. You'll have greater clarity. But sleep is of great importance. Now we can go too far, go to the ant thou sluggard, we can sleep too much. That's equally destructive, but not enough sleep makes me completely ineffective at everything else God wants to do in my life.